lot about things from my mom. A lot of things, like how to
Mm,
cook, how to shop, how to be frugal. But I never learned about sex
mhm,
from my mom or my dad for that matter.
mm,
And I think that when we had children, we didn't know how to talk to our kids about sex.
yeah,
And it was one of those topics where we really had to figure out
mm,
how do we
mhm,
present these things? How do we not just create a good environment, but practically, where do you start? What do you say? And that's what we want to share with you
mm.
today.
Yeah, and I want to make it abundantly clear. This is my field. I've been doing this a long time. Uh, you're not dense that you don't know how to handle this. We are centuries into a miseducation that
Mhm.
conveys to us that sex is taboo, sex is bad, sex is dirty. But now we have another loud voice screaming at us culturally the last number
Mhm.
of years that sex is just whatever, and that there are no guidelines in it. So it's if your head is about to explode about the
Mhm.
subject of sexuality, it's not because something's wrong with you; it's because you've been screamed at hundreds of thousands of times that we've received these messages. So I just want to make sure you know that as a parent, it's not because something's wrong with you
Mhm.
that this is a bit challenging. It certainly was for us, but that was part of our perspective early on. We didn't know what to do, but we sure knew what we didn't want to do. And we did not want to repeat what had been done with us. And we knew there had to be a better way. We didn't know what that way was initially, but we knew that there had to be a better way.
Yeah, there's definitely sadness to the idea that
Mm,
as a parent, it's pretty comfortable teaching your children how to cook.
mm,
But whoa, when it comes to the topic of
yeah,
sex, we do not know how to approach it.
yeah,
And, often if you don't have a plan, at some point it's going to come up anyway
mm,
with your kids. They're going to come home from school because they've
yeah,
heard something,
mm,
or you're going to walk into the room and they're watching something
mm,
on television that you realize is going to lead them down uh, to a
yeah,
scene, a sex scene. And
mm.
then how do you react to that? How do you create a safe space? And even how do you start that
Mm.
conversation?
Yeah. And we always say that you get to choose one thing about your children learning about sexuality, and that's who they learn it from first. You don't
Hmm.
get to choose when they learn it because, and a lot of parents are like, oh, when they're 15, I'll have a sit down conversation with them. And our kids are laughing at us in all honesty because
Hmm.
they're like, wait, mom and dad, you're talking to me. I'm 15. I've been hearing messages about this for who knows what, 6, 7 years at that point. So we want to make sure that we get to be, as parents, we get to be the first voice that they hear because that's what they really kind of peg things on, who they learn from first, which might be their fellow fourth graders. And we don't
Hmm.
want some of that information is inaccurate. Only our oldest child remembers learning about sex. Our younger three, it was just part of life. And they knew that something was happening. And we had a closed door policy, but they knew something was happening with these two. And I'm talking about when they're 3 and 4 and 5 years old. And it's really great now having adult children that they talk about this. And they're like, we always knew something funky was happening. In the beginning of our marriage was really rough, and we were not emotionally connected. We were not sexually connected. But by the time our kids started learning, got to the age where they were really learning about sexuality, they knew that this was the model that they
Hmm.
wanted to be able to duplicate someday.
Well, and I think that having tools just to the
Mm,
practical stuff, like how do you buy yourself
yeah.
time?
Hmm.
Let's say your child comes home from preschool and they want to know what is sex. Maybe
Mm,
that's their first question. They heard the word and they
right.
don't know what to do. So often we kind of panic because we're not
Mm,
quite prepared for that
right.
topic. We're not
Yeah.
quite prepared for that conversation. And so we panic. So, how do you buy yourself some time? What is that practical tool?
Yeah, and with the connection codes, that's what we call the OO. If nothing else, the OO buys you time. The OO is great for the other person. We know this now from research that when you're audible with them, it actually tickles their brain differently than if you're just silent. And you may be totally tuned in and attentive, but if you're able to OO them, and there's lots of versions of the OO, but to be audible, to be able to go, oh, wow. So, but what have you heard about that? If nothing else, the ooh buys you some time.
Mm.
And for most of us with difficult conversations, we could use a good 10, 12, 15 seconds just to kind of catch up. And we also call it following the energy as opposed to resisting the energy, just to be able to follow their energy and go,
Mhm.
so what have you heard about that? What prompts you to ask that? That's a great question, by the way. So help me get what happens for you when you hear that question because you may need 10 or 15 seconds to be able to catch up with them, and just literally to be able to settle yourself for the discussion.
Well, and questions really gives you a good context
Mm,
because
yeah.
sometimes what you think you just heard, which
Right.
was the word sex,
Yeah.
sex, it's
Mm,
actually the word sec,
mm,
short abbreviation of second. And so then you respond in a total
mm,
panic over a word that wasn't even the word that your child just said.
yeah.
So buy some time and ask a question calmly in response to be able to
Yeah.
find out now, oh, where did you hear that? And what
Mm,
did they tell you? Because you really need that information.
mm,
You need to know where this question has already gone
yeah.
because they may have already heard a good bit of stuff. And so
Right.
then you are able to be the one that they really
Mm,
feel safe with, and they know they can ask you anything, that you're not going to punish
right.
them or freak out or even put it off.
Mm,
Because sometimes, if you respond, oh, go ask dad,
mm,
if you're the mom, or vice versa, or you say, we'll talk about that later,
mm,
then you've made something really big out of something
yeah.
that should be just normal
Yeah,
conversation.
and they are going to go find somebody to talk to them
Mm.
about it. And I did. I learned about sex in third grade from my fellow third graders. It was many, many years later that I found out some of that information was not accurate or even beneficial. And I didn't know. It's just who talked about it. So that's who I listened to. But another thing that we talk about a lot is letting the child be the driver,
Mhm.
because the questions that the level to which the question needs to be answered is different for a 5-year old than it is for an 8-year old. So
Mhm.
you want to again follow the energy and find out what this little one wants to know, because they may not be in the least bit interested in a play-by-play, very clear graphic illustration. An older child probably needs to know exactly, because they're going to find out one way or another. So you want to be the one that's able to fill in those blanks, fill in that information for them. But if a 4-year old is just, I heard, Johnny told me that storks deliver babies. Is that true? Well, this little one, this 4-year old, doesn't have a clue about the in depth what that means. It's like, oh no, actually, a male and a female, a mom and a dad are involved sexually, and that's where the baby comes from. And for a lot of 4-year olds, a lot of 5-year olds, that's good. They don't care. So we let them be the driver and make sure that we're actually
Mhm.
answering the questions that they have. And typically, you're not going to overshare, because they'll just tune out and pick up some Legos and start playing with it. They just don't care that much
Mhm.
if their interest level has already been met.
Mhm.
But we really emphasize that, to let the child be the driver, and they'll keep asking questions if we create safe space for them.
It starts, I think, even with when they're so little and you're teaching them body parts.
Wow. Yeah,
So
that's
if
big.
you, because of your own
Mm,
embarrassment or shame or your own past, just decide to rename, like no one renames the nose or the eyes or the ears. We're
mm.
really clear on that, right? But then when
Yeah.
it comes to the penis, we might call it a wiener.
Mm,
And then later on, you have to call it what it really is at some
right.
point, or they hear someone else call it a
Mm,
penis and they're
yeah.
like, that's not a penis, it's a wiener. And then they are put into an awkward
Mm,
position with a friend, maybe a same age friend or an older
mm,
friend who's like, that's not what it is.
mm,
And then they're made fun of. So then they
right.
experience shame over what you've taught them by naming it something different.
Mm,
And just to be aware of little things like that when they are tiny, when they're just learning words, it's your words that they need to learn
mm,
correctly. And we might feel awkward about the word vagina, or we might not
mm,
like it, but to name things correctly will really bless your children
mm,
as they get older. And we're often asked when you've talked openly with your children and then at a young age and then they mention it at preschool.
mm,
Yeah, there may be some other parents who
yeah.
don't appreciate that and there may be other reactions and you
Mm,
may get a phone call, but to be confident in the what you are striving to do,
mm,
and that is to be that voice for your child. And you can teach your children that this is a private
mm,
conversation, so it's not Johnny at school
mm, wow.
doesn't need to hear it from you.
Yeah.
And so there are ways to even teach that as far
Mm,
as protecting your children from how others are going to react to them
mm,
is important because in that whole world, as you know, a lot of people are not
right.
comfortable with it and they want it to be kept a
Mm,
secret. And so they have, felt very strongly about their children
yeah,
not learning it from them.
yeah,
And so then it comes out on the playground.
yeah, yeah. Which is part of our dream is that we're able to change culture so this doesn't become a big taboo subject, so that our kids never learn about sexuality. They just always know about it, and then that takes away that stunning opportunity for this third grader to tell your third grader about sex, because your third grader's already known about it for their whole life, which kind of leads us into the whole idea. And we know that there's lots of variation in the audience here, but part of what that ends up suggesting is that the mom and dad need to have a great sexual connection.
Mm.
They need to have a great sexual relationship. So it kind of sets the standard, sets the bar pretty high for us. Which again, we did not start out that way at all. We knew what we didn't want, but we didn't know how to do what we wanted for many years, and it took us a long time to get there. But that was our goal, was to set that example for our kids as far as what they could model, could emulate as they got older.
For a lot of people, they even feel like showing affection in front of their children,
Mm,
kissing in front of their children, holding hands is inappropriate. And
mm,
again, you question, where did that come from? Where
mm,
did we hear that message? Because if we demonstrate that to our children, we're
mm,
actually teaching them a
yeah,
safe and a healthy way to look at that and to view that and to ask
right.
questions about that and to be able to be affectionate,
Hmm.
for them to see, okay, daddy really likes mom,
Mm,
mom really likes dad.
right.
And so sometimes we have to deal with our own stuff and really realize,
Absolutely.
well, we got to change the narrative here so that we
Well,
can teach our children something healthy and something good. And even with just I think about terminology that we
mm,
sometimes don't understand, even with small children, where we go, oh, do you have a boyfriend? Oh, do you have a
mm,
girlfriend? We're opening up a conversation that is really big. And when we put pressure on
right.
our children to feel like they have to have
Mm,
a boyfriend or a girlfriend,
right.
then if you don't walk through that with them, they get lost pretty young in what that even means.
Mm,
And then they feel like that is kind of a standard of they have to be pursuing relationships. And, those are the
yeah.
things we don't often think about.
Mm,
And it's just kind of thrown out there to be cute, and yet, that is a big topic of where a lot of
mm,
this starts, and knowing how to have healthy friendships,
mm,
which, eventually turn into dating relationships. And you want, even as far as you thinking about your children being sexually active,
yeah.
those are the conversations that can happen at a young age where they know that you want them to be older.
Mm,
And to the less that you talk about this, the more it leaves it up to them to figure it out,
yeah.
and that can be super scary. And I think
Mm,
our reaction time, I love that you started off by talking about how do you buy yourself time?
mm,
Well, why is that important? Well, because
mhm,
sometimes our kids come home and they say unbelievable things
mm,
of what they've heard. And, even we had a friend share recently that their son came home and he said, Mom, somebody told me that girls suck boys' penises. And this kid's like 7 or 8.
yeah.
So, wow, right away, you have a topic that you probably were
Mm,
not prepared to talk
yeah.
about.
And you didn't know that morning that that was going to be the topic
Mm,
of the day. That's for sure.
yes. And
Yeah.
then you buy yourself time, you
Mm,
go, oh, wow, who, who talked about that?
mm,
And what did they tell you? And where I know that the way my parents would have reacted,
mm,
my mouth would have been washed out with soap.
wow.
And that would have ended that conversation. And I would
Mm,
have never come home asking anything that I thought might hint
right.
at such a topic.
Yeah.
So your reaction, even if inside you are about to throw up,
Mm,
that inside panic, you buy yourself some time
mm,
and you go, oh, wow. Now, where did you hear that? And who,
mm,
and who said that? And what were they thinking?
mm,
And then you're onto a topic that you might not be ready for.
yeah.
And so it's kind of good to think those things through. And I think sometimes even words that we cringe at, maybe it's a cuss word
Mm,
that we are not comfortable with, that we don't ever use,
mm,
but they've heard it and they come home and all of a sudden they say it to their sibling.
yeah.
Well, if you shut that down by reacting to the word
Mm,
and you punish them for the word, you don't get to the actual teaching
yeah.
of what the word means,
Mm,
or even what's happening. with your son or daughter? And I love that, even that
Mm.
terminology, what's happening. Can you share about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Well, and to just be able to again follow their energy and find out what's happening for them, what they've heard about it, what it means to them. Because with our little ones, 3-year-old, 4, 5, 6, whatever, it doesn't mean anything to them. So they learn this new word. It's stunning when you do the math that kids are learning 3 to 5 new words every day, which is crazy to think that rate throughout their childhood that they're because we don't think of it that way like, oh, did you learn 5 new words today? But they did. And one of those might be a profanity. They're not trying to learn that. They didn't wake up that morning and go, I'm going to go learn a cuss word today. Not at all. They just happen to have heard that and they learned that word. And to let them know that they're not evil or bad because they heard that word, they just heard the word. Is it appropriate? Probably not. We're not going to use that word in certain settings. And even with words like penis or vagina, to say, yeah, we don't just yell that out in a group. It's just not appropriate. That's just not what we do culturally. But they're not evil because that word is interesting to them. That's just what's happening for them in the moment they heard the word. But to be able to ask them, again, follow their energy, just go, so what happens for you there? What happened that you heard that word and what does it mean to you? And just be able to be present with them because you want them to have those conversations with you. And I don't doubt for a second that sometimes you're going to break out in a cold sweat when you hear certain things. We certainly experienced that with our children, where we'd be like, "Whoa, that's a little different." This is pre-connection codes for us, so we weren't great at it, but we knew to slow down with them. We did get that
Mhm.
right, just to be able to slow down with them, be present with them, and realize that they're experiencing what they're experiencing not because they decided to, but
Mhm.
simply because that's what's happening for them in the moment. And we wanted to make sure that we were able to be present with them in their experience.
Well, even on that topic, when you just use the phrase "what happened,"
Mm,
you get to the heart of what is going on with your
yeah,
child
yeah,
at any age.
mm,
And I mean, even 3-year-olds understand the word "what happened,"
mm,
and they will tell you. They'll tell you a
uh-huh,
story that will make sense to what the action
mhm,
is. So let's say back to the whole idea that you've got two children and they say something to each other
mm,
that is using profanity. If you just react to the word, you miss the opportunity to really get to the heart
mm,
of where the word either came from,
yeah,
where they heard the word, or what's happening with them to have used the
yeah,
word. And so we punish the child for the usage of the word, well, we don't learn about
mm,
what's happening in the heart of
right,
your child. Where
yeah,
if you go, "Oh, buddy, what happened?" Well, then he will probably tell you that his sibling
mm,
was antagonizing
mhm,
him. And so then you slow it all down to first deal with what was happening for the child who said the word.
right,
And then you give
yeah,
them a tool. Well, instead of
mm,
calling him that,
mm,
use this. Say, "That really hurt
mm,
me."
yeah,
And then they're really getting to the core of it.
mm,
And it
right,
teaches children such a beautiful thing because as we grow older and we treat each other that way, it's almost like it never feels good
mm,
to be called some profanity,
mm,
and no matter what age. And so to give your children what you're teaching that says, "Ooh, what
yeah,
happened?" And you listen to the hurt, and then you
mm,
go, sounds like hurt,
yeah,
sounds like sadness. And then you teach them to express
yeah,
that
right,
emotion from the core. And then you also find out from the sibling who was the antagonist what was going on with them, that they were so unkind to their sibling.
yeah, yeah. But to also realize they could just as easily call their brother a stupid idiot. Well, that's not a win. It's
Right.
not profanity, but they call him a jerk. Well, that's not a connecting
Mm-hmm.
interaction. So it's not really the word itself that's the issue. It's the
Mm-hmm.
relationship, the connection or lack of connection. I remember with our son, we have 3 daughters and one son, and I remember somewhere he was probably 5 or 6, and one night he brought up, and I'd read him a book, and he brought up the idea of sex and wanted to know if so you and mom are involved sexually, you have sex, and of course I said yeah, and he was so distraught by that. And this is way pre-connection codes, way us learning so much about sexuality, and certainly before I was a sexologist. So I didn't really know. Again, we knew what we didn't want to do, but we didn't really clearly know what we wanted to do. But I was able to breathe deeply in the moment with him And this is long before we even understood the concept of following the energy, but I was able to follow his energy. But he was really distraught about that. That just seemed really odd to him, and it bothered him. He brought it up the next night. And I don't remember how many nights in a row, but it was several that he brought it up. And finally, it hit me one day, and it wasn't catastrophic or really intense, but he was just bothered by this. This just seemed like a bad idea. So he brought it up again that night, and I said, "Let me ask you something, buddy. What would you think about tomorrow? You going to work and working for maybe 9 hours?" And his eyes got big, and he said, "Daddy, I don't think I could do that." I said, "Well, what if you did it tomorrow and then you did it the next day too?" And he's like, "Well, I could try." And I mean, his eyes were getting big. He was just like, "Oh my goodness, what am I getting signed up for here?" And I said, "What if you did that most days? Most days you're working 8, 9, 10 hours. You're just working. It seems like all the time. How would you feel about that?" And he's like, "I just don't think I could do that." And after I built up the drama of it a bit, I said, "Do you realize that that's what Daddy does? I go to work most days of the week, and I work 8, 9, 10, sometimes 11, 12 hours." And he said, "Well, yeah, but Dad, you're a grown up. You can do that, but I can't do that." And I said, "You know what? The same thing is true of sexual relationship. Right now, the idea of working 9 hours a day most days is crushing you. That's too much. You can't handle that." And but for me, it's like, well, that's just what I do because I'm a grown up. So the same thing is true for sex. As you get older, it'll make sense to you and it'll fit for you. Right now, it's pretty overwhelming, and you don't like the idea of it. And he kind of paused and he said, "So, but it's okay if I don't like the idea of it right now." And I said, "Oh, absolutely." And he just kind of grinned. He goes, "So can we read another book now?" And that was it. And it was settled for life. And I have an adult son now, I assure you, who's very positive about sexuality. But I didn't know there for a bit, a few days.
Mm.
And again, we had a lot of peers who were saying, "You can't do that. You shouldn't talk to your children about sex." And I knew that I didn't want to do that, but I wasn't sure what to do. But that settled it for him for life. And he remember as an adult now, he remembers that conversation, that time, and that was just washed over him. That okay, now as a whatever he was, 5, 6 year old, he didn't have to be excited about sex. He could think it was gross or weird or odd. That's fine. Yeah. And so letting him be the driver of it and just being present with him in the moment, that kind of settled his little spirit about it. That he didn't have to be feel great about it now. And again, I assure you, as time passed, he got really, really positive about the idea of sexuality.
Yeah, so good. The
Mm,
way we react to our kids in
mm,
the moment isn't
mm,
always best, and we know it
mm,
later. And so
yeah.
there is, and then maybe for some of you, you're even sitting here thinking, "Oh my goodness, I've already missed so many
Mm,
teaching
right.
moments, so many opportunities." You can go back and say to your child,
Yeah.
"You know what? I missed it,
Mm,
and I want to redo,
yeah.
and I want to do something different, and I want us to be able to talk about things."
Mm,
And I think sex is unique because we
mm,
have to struggle through our own history
yeah.
of it and
Yeah.
our own upbringing in it and our
Mm,
own discomfort in it. And yeah, like you mentioned, we live in a society where you don't talk about sex
mm,
in a healthy way with your friends,
yeah.
or you don't hear messages about it that are positive. And so it's like you're trying to break a generational curse
Mm,
and you're trying to do something different with your
right.
children.
Yeah.
And you can, just in those moments, I love how so children are so forgiving. If you will go back and
Mm,
say, I really missed it, even
yeah.
if your child is already a teenager,
Mm,
to go, I've really missed some things.
yeah.
And when you learn new tools,
Mm,
you can say to your children, I missed
yeah.
some things. And I want us to be able to talk about things. And
Yeah.
I want to be able to be safe for you. And
Mm,
how can I create safety with you? I've reacted poorly in the past. Kids
yeah.
are very forgiving.
Yeah.
Now, I know it is true as they get a little older, teenagers will question your genuineness in
Mm,
it. They're going to go, not sure I believe you. That's okay. And,
mm,
sometimes you may discover tools that are really helpful. Uh, just this whole thing that you're involved in right now is because you're wanting to learn better
Yeah.
tools. Well, you can tell your children that.
Hmm.
You can go to them and
Absolutely.
say, I missed some things and I'm learning some really powerful tools and some really, I'm
Yeah.
reading or I'm watching really good material.
Mm.
They can hear that.
Yeah.
And you can make a change in your home. You
Mm.
can create a different environment if that's not been the environment in your home,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is huge.
Yeah, and that's what we call that the third of the three phrases with the connection codes to be able to say and all the time with people to be able to say, I missed it. Again, we're not indicting you, we're not indicting the other person. We all miss stuff. You just missed something with them. And to be able to go back to your kids and go, I think I missed a couple of things here. I want to get better at this. And it's so inviting. And then for them to recognize you as the parent to go, oh, dad missed this. Okay, great. We'll go back and cover it now. But again, to understand that we are centuries into an education that says sex is taboo, it's not allowed to be talked about. But now we're in this culture that has I don't know if it's the opposite, but has this other message that everything is over sexualized. So it's a bizarre tornado that we're in now. And so it's incredibly difficult to navigate, which for many of us, that means we talk about sex less. But our dream for everybody is that you're able to actually talk about sex very openly with your children, so that number one, you're the first person that they learn about
Mhm.
sexuality from, but number two, that they end up with a very positive view of sexuality, and for you to be able to convey that to them. And even we were able to convey to our kids, we missed a lot of stuff. Again, that phrase, we missed it as far as our sexual relationship, both when we were dating, when we were first married. There was so much wounding for the two
Mhm.
of us, and our kids know that story and knew that story early on,
Mhm.
that we missed a lot of stuff together. And then they're able to go, okay, well, I want to learn from mom and dad's mistakes
Mhm.
to learn that they missed a lot of stuff. And I want to be able to do it even better than they did.
I think that that is one thing we did with our kids is we told them about our mistakes.
Mm.
We told our story over and
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
And it started when we were teenagers. I mean, we have quite the
Mm.
story. And we had friends who were like, "Don't tell your kids that they're going to think now
Mm.
they can do it."
Yeah.
It didn't ever work out that way.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just opened up the door for them to feel safe to talk about things
Mm.
because they knew our story. They knew that we already knew all this stuff.
Mm.
We knew about drugs, we knew
Yeah.
about alcohol, we knew about sex, we knew about pornography. We knew that because we told our kids that.
Mm.
And so then they were free to come and talk to us.
Mm.
A minute ago, you mentioned that there are three particular phrases. Can you go back
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
those?
Yeah. Well, with the connection codes, we call the three phrases, ooh, what's happening? I missed it. Again, to be able to ooh your anybody, but certainly to be able to ooh your kids, buy yourself some time, to be able to catch up with them, follow their energy, and then just invite them into themselves, into their own experience. So, what happens for you there? Because again, you're going to find out things you didn't realize because they're asking you a question, and you're like, oh, I know what this means. Not necessarily. Your 4 year old may ask you a question and it sounds like they're asking this, whether it's about sexuality or whatever. And in reality, that's not their point at all. And you may spend 10 minutes answering a question they didn't even ask, but you thought that's what they were asking. So literally to be able to go, oh, so what's happening with that? Help me get that. What am I missing? Catch me up there. And then they'll elaborate on it. And you're creating that safe space where they can clarify what the question is. Again, so for so many of us, we grew up that you were never allowed to ask questions like that. And as Phyllis mentioned before, it's washing the mouth out with soap, which most of us aren't to that degree, but we kind of have the same idea. So be able to implement those three phrases all the time. We always say go to Amazon.com, get an extra large box of oohs because you're going to need a ton of them. You need to have them all over the place in your pocket, on the counter, in your car, everywhere to be able to ooh each other all day long. And to teach your kids that too, to be able to ooh you that when you're struggling with something, and we missed a lot of things with our kids. One of the things we did well with them was establish teamship. And to this day, our children are teammates with each other and they're teammates with us. And that's a phenomenal way to get to live in connection with each other.
So proud that you are on
Mm,
this journey.
yeah,
Man, I'm just
amazing.
thinking if we had this,
Mm,
wow.
wow, yeah.
We learned the hard way. We
Mm,
didn't have tools. We tried. I mean, we read so many books, didn't find
mm,
what we really needed. So the fact
yeah,
that you are on this journey and
mm,
that you are going after it And the fact
Yeah.
that you can go back and go to your kids, we missed it,
Mm.
which gives you a chance to redo and to do it again and to
Yeah.
try again to connect with your kids on topics that are
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah. That's
So,
cool.
again, thank you for being with us
Mm.
today and for
Yeah.
really taking this in.